Because I love biology. I'm an electrical engineer, and I feel like so much of us is measurable. And yet we just leave ourselves just, the data is just lying. We don't use it enough.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Haresh. This is Conversations with Haresh. We'll be talking to people of varied backgrounds, covering various topics. I'm very excited to be able to share these with you. The goal is to increase curiosity and empathy amongst all of us to help us grow professionally and personally at all levels. And of course, we also want to make sure that this is fun. So thank you again, and we'll look forward to having you. Hi, Indira.
Hi, Haresh.
Welcome to our podcast episode, and thanks for doing this with us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed the last time we got together for a panel.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, so happy to be back here for another conversation.
Awesome. And you're in, this time you're in California.
Yes, I am in San Jose. That's where I live.
Okay, awesome. As we were preparing for this, I mentioned, we're doing these conversations with people of various backgrounds, etc. So I'm looking forward to digging into some of that, what you're doing, what you've been doing. We'll get to know you a little bit and then talk about things that have created success and maybe setbacks and how you've navigated all those things. And then, of course, seeing how, balancing the personal and professional has worked out for you or things that you've learned over time. And then one of the other things I mentioned was, the conversation will keep it very free flowing so you can talk about things as they come to you as well. But one of the things I'm really curious about is what are your interests? What are you most passionate about, right? These days, overlapping professional and personal. With that, if you could just give us a introduction to Indira, that would be wonderful. And also expand on what you're doing currently a little bit more.
That's a good question. I think this is, as of last week, I am self-employed. My company that I started, it's called Enginiosity, because I'm an engineer with lots of curiosity.
Oh, wow.
And I'm glad that the name was available. But as part of Enginiosity, I am.
You might be also a marketer, but anyway. Go ahead.
Yes. But as one of the things that I'm starting to do, because I'm not fully ready to just like launch a startup right away, and they do say consulting is the gateway drug to entrepreneurship. So I am consulting part-time, and I'm consulting with the same team and the same projects that I was doing at Gates Foundation. So I'm consulting with Global Health Labs. It's Gates Ventures company, so still parts of the Gates verse. Before that was when we had met last time. This was for the AI panel in Seattle. I was at the Gates Foundation back then. I was deputy director of devices and AI. I had helped set up that team. Very proud of that team. I love hiring people that are probably much better than me for the role and then making myself redundant. So that's what I did. Before that, I was at AliveCor. I was a VP of product for somehow. AliveCor is an awesome company. They make a medical consumer ECG device, but it's a startup, but the reason they're very successful in this space is because it's FDA cleared. They've got a lot of clinical validation. And so you actually have cardiologists that recommend it. And so it's a company that I'd been a fan of probably for 10 years since it had started. They ended up raising a round, and I realized that that's the right opportunity to join them. And before that, I was at Intel for for over 10 years. So it was the last thing I did was I was a director in the health and life sciences business unit. But pretty much most of my time before that was also doing what I would call biosensors, basically sensors that are sensing something about the body. And that is really, I think, the common theme through most of what I have done out of choice. Because I love biology. I'm an electrical engineer, and I feel like so much of us is measurable. And yet we just leave ourselves just, the data is just lying. We don't use it enough. So biosensors, I think work-wise, that's probably what I'm most interested in.
So I'm curious, before Indira became a professional, right? We all had various opportunities to be children and adolescents and whatever. At what point or how did your kind of professional interest how was it influenced by childhood experiences or family experiences and other professionals and other leaders or experts that you ran into that you saw? Or sometimes, people are also affected by health events in the family and so on as well.
Yeah, all of that, I think, I don't think I'd be unique in that a lot of our values get ingrained in us when we're babies, right? By our
Sure.
parents and our surroundings. And
Or even before in the genes.
yeah, perhaps, what we're good at and what we're not. And we don't question our values except like if something comes up and really makes you question it. So I grew up in India, like you, and education is generally very important in the culture. And generally, the two choices given to most middle class students in India is, you choose between the doctor and an engineer. And frankly, I don't think I was able to choose for the longest time. I loved biology, but I also loved physics and chemistry. So I did biology and math until the 12th grade. I actually appeared for examinations to enter both medical school and engineering school. I think I just got better options for engineering. That's why I chose that direction. But I'm a builder at heart, so I'm glad that worked out. But in terms of, my parents, my mom is a chemistry teacher. And before that, when she taught what is considered middle school, like you're a science teacher, you teach chemistry, physics, biology. So I think just the environment at home was we talked about science a lot growing up. She had access to books, for like senior classes. So if there's any amount of curiosity, you could keep learning more and more. Like you could be in the fifth grade and be reading 10th grade, like universe chapters or whatever, if that's what I was curious about. So that was true. So by the time I would reach those grades, I was well versed in the subjects because I just had access and I had the ability to discuss with her. I remember this one time my dad's in the army or was in the army, so he would stay. He would be posted to different places on the field, but then he'd come home for vacations. And this one dinner or lunch we were having at home, at the dining table, me and my sister and my mom, we were having this heated debate over the probability of the electron clouds around a certain atom and what the shape would be. And my dad is just like, what have you done to these children? So so I think that was definitely a big factor in just being in love with science. And I would say the other thing I say all the time is I think good engineers are born, not made, in the sense that some people just intrinsically love to build.
Oh, wow.
I think everyone could be logical and maybe you could develop the abilities. But for example, my dad has been a soldier all his life, but he loved building and tinkering. So he was always like putting together, sort of constructing things in the house. I was his assistant handyman. And so to me, that became pretty normal way of life. And then he didn't have like formal training to do that. So I think those two things combined together to shape me as a person who likes to build, loves to build, but also has studied a lot of science to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I knew a little bit about your journey for this conversation, but there's probably a lot to dissect, right? In terms of your experiences, might be the case with a lot of people's experiences. Which part of India was this? Or did you move around as part of the army?
We moved around a fair bit. My parents are from Dehradun, which is a foothills of the Himalayas town, and it's famous because that's where Steve Jobs and Beatles went to find themselves.
Oh.
It's got these like holy cities around it, and so there's a lot of I would say spiritualism in the air as well. But yeah, but
Do engineering problems sometimes require prayers?
prayers, I don't know. I find it pretty hard to, the scientific method requires proof before conviction. So it's pretty hard to just have faith. I can see that there are things that are unexplained by science yet. And so you
Of
can
course.
have a placeholder theory, but I think the very clear definitions we have in a lot of our religions, those are pretty hard to accept.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, that's another probably episode or
Yeah,
weeks of
yeah.
episodes,
Let's not
right?
let's not go into
Yeah,
areas
we're
that.
not. We won't have a chance to kind of explore that really deeply. I studied physics and at one point wanted to be a physicist and then went into engineering instead and eventually into entrepreneurship and business and so on. In physics, there are a lot of scientists historically, right, that were unfortunately or however it happened, right? It was very male dominated field. And many of the characters that were great physicists were not personally the best characters, but there's some that I think, gave insights or suggestions that I thought were really, really interesting and helpful, especially in the areas of being a scientist or an engineer. And so one of the authors that I've read over the years, and one of the experts in physics is Richard Feynman, who's passed away. And then he had this, and I think some of the committed or convicted atheists also say this, that you cannot be a true scientist unless you can preserve the element of doubt in everything, right? And so I'd love to go to those people and ask them about how do you reconcile a lot of scientists who are spiritually, convinced, right, with that. While they're exceptionally good scientists still, right? They're not, right? They're exceptionally good. So again, a different topic, but
No, I have a recent story actually. Yes, there is a need for a placeholder theory to explain everything that science cannot explain. And you can choose to come up with your own or accept the dominant theory handed down to you by religion. Recently, I was at a IEEE conference in Goa. ISRO had a big sort of show, not big show. There, like the chairman of
so
ISRO was
Indian
there.
Science Research Organization. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's the equivalent of NASA, right?
Exactly. That's it. The equivalent of NASA. The difference is NASA is more like an agency. They give contracts to private companies to build the components they need, and they build some in-house. But ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, builds almost everything internally in-house. So it's like a lot. It's the top scientists of the country, that caliber of people. And then one of the ladies from ISRO, Kalpana Arvind, she showed up. I didn't know who she was, but she showed up on one of the women's panel. She's wearing a sari and, very traditional looking. And then she gets up on stage and she starts talking about, she's basically the project associate director, like the second in command for the Chandrayaan mission, the moon mission India had recently led. She leads the entire sensors lab for all of ISRO. So highly technical. She gave a very technical presentation, and it was such a juxtaposition because she was, dressed so conservatively. And then right after the presentation, we were talking, and she's like, "Let's go to the temple." And then we went to the temple, and it wasn't like, "Let's go see the architecture." It was like she sat down, she stayed there for 20 minutes, eyes closed. She said she's connecting with God. So I am. I'm no stranger to having met a lot of people who are brilliant scientists who do accept the current theory of religion. And I accept that there is a gap and there needs to be some explanation that you believe in. It's just the completeness of the explanations is what bothers me. Anyway, I know we're like completely on a
No,
tangent.
it's good. Actually, the goal of these conversations is to explore whatever is relevant and people are passionate about. So speaking of interest and kind of your thinking, I guess we touched on spirituality a little bit. So in your line of work, is there a philosophical drive, if not spiritual, right? As far as like, why are sensors interesting if we come back to that, for example, right? I know that you're working in healthcare. A lot of people that are motivated to work in healthcare are like, oh, I'm driven by empathy. They could have been driven by, XYZ events as well, but they find that, okay, I'm a patient, right? I got this condition, my family had this condition, or I've seen suffering, or I've seen something, right? And that's what drives them, right? And then what ends up happening, at least for me, I don't pretend to know really deep things of life or the universe. I'm like, but I know what I've been through. And you kind of have this sense of empathy or compassion. And you're like, well, maybe if you can do a couple of things to help fewer people repeat the bad things I've been through and repeat more of the good things that I might have been through. And so actually, we started a real estate company as an example about 10 years ago because I think the real estate ecosystem is still broken in the US, right? And it's not about individual agents. The whole system's broken. The courts are catching up now, but it's one of those things where I went through multiple house transactions with very unhappy results, and then the whole industry. We went to talk to people in the industry, and then my business partner at the time also happened to go through transactions at the same time. Everybody in the industry would be like, "Oh, you had the wrong agent," right? And it's like I had the wrong agent 6 times or 8 times, and my business partner had the wrong agent or whatever it was. But then we were like, okay, why are people consumers being subjugated?
And why is this agent dependent, right? In a way,
Exactly. A whole bunch of things, right? I mean, if you get into the specifics, there's a lot of specifics there. So, but then it drove us, right? We were like super motivated. And of course, we wanted to be successful. We wanted to make money ourselves. It's not like we were doing it out of charity, right? But we thought that there was a way to solve the problem in a way that would allow us to make money and be financially successful, but also the consumer would be better. So so coming back to the question, right? So is healthcare and sensors and this the line of work that you find yourself in, right? Yeah, of course, intellectually it's very intriguing, but there are so many intellectual problems that are intriguing.
yeah, it's a fair question. Definitely, I do feel empathy for anybody going through suffering, especially if the suffering is unnecessary in the sense that there is technology or drugs or something that exists that would have prevented it. I think the injustice of suffering because of who you were born as, that really definitely does bother me. And I would say empathy is an interesting topic you brought up because I feel like my circle of empathy is pretty wide, but less deep in the sense that I think the larger your circle of empathy is, I think the lesser empathy you feel for the people that are closest to you.
For individuals, potentially.
Yes, yes. So it is very much like I would rather invest in something, effort or time or money into a technology that would improve the lives of 1 million people by 10% than invest in something that would improve the lives of, I don't know, 1,000 people that are closer to me by 5% or 10%. Like the empathy circles that are typically like here's a family, then your friends, your state and country, etc. I mean, that's one of the reasons I worked at the Gates Foundation, right? Some of my prime years. The motto of Gates Foundation is every life has equal value. And I feel that very strongly. And I think as an immigrant from a developing country, it makes a lot of sense that you would feel it because if you think about how life insurance companies value a life monetarily, right? I don't know, it's probably a few 100,000 or $1 million for an American life, and it's probably like less than $100 for like a lower middle class Indian life. And so, like, that injustice really bothers me. So, I think one is that I am driven by this unjust and unnecessary suffering. It makes, I really feel like I must work to eliminate it. The other, yeah, I mean, there's obviously stuff in the family. I mean, cardiac issues are common everywhere, so also are in my family. And one of the reasons I was at AliveCor was because I was really driven to try to improve cardiac issues. My dad's a heart patient. I'll probably be one at some point. Uh, so, yes.
Hopefully, after a long while.
I mean, I think we're all developing the diseases that we eventually fall prey to, right? So that happens from pretty early on. That's the idea of medicine 3.0, that you don't treat something. Medicine 2.0 is you treat something when people have crossed a binary threshold into now they have diabetes, now they have heart disease. But the medicine 3.0 idea is that people are developing that disease the entire time. Right. And so you should be trying to prevent it much earlier and not only start to treat people later. So, yeah, I think driven by the fact that I do believe every life has equal value and there's huge injustice in how suffering is distributed in the world. And a lot of that suffering is unnecessary. To me, that extends to animals as well. I know we don't talk about it much because there's enough human beings to try to help first. But just, yeah, it's pretty hard to watch anyone suffering. Oh, and there's a second aspect to it. The signals of the body. I'm very driven by curiosity, and I feel like the body is not a machine that we understand super well right now. So, in terms of curiosity, I'm very driven to try to decode the body's signals.
I see. And so obviously sensors is a great place to be.
I wish I had done more. I had a better understanding of the biochemistry. It's not, I mean, there's only so much time in life, right? And I've ended up having to stay away from the wet chemistry part of the world of biology just because how much can a human being learn?
I see. I see. there are few individuals who get the opportunity or who have the brain capacity and the time and the resources, right, to really dig into multiple domains. Maybe Mr. Gates is one of those people, but most of us, I mean, I'm sure even he would say he wished he has more brain, more time to get into more fields more deeply, etc. But so we're all making some practical trade-offs and decisions.
I wonder if in our lifetimes we will become bionic, like we will end up supplementing our brains with implantables, or, like a large language model can absorb a lot of the written text that all the written text that exist and sort of combine that knowledge, and you can ask it a question about biochemistry. I wonder if there'll be a neural highway connecting human brains.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I actually, last weekend or yesterday, I went on a ski outing in the foothills of the Cascades, a place called Crystal Mountain, a couple hours from here. And then on the way there, I was about 2 hours with a nephew who's in his early 20s. He works for this company that aggregates data from a bunch of hospital chains, and they're doing machine learning and analytics on that. And so we ended up talking about AI and so on. So if you look at the brain, the artificial brain, it doesn't have the number of parameters that a human brain does, nearly, not yet, but it's much more efficient at learning. And that's why it's actually, in some ways, amazing that as few parameters that it can have compared to a human brain, it gets still very smart. So your question, I guess, sounds like, can humans learn faster through the aid of machines, right? So that we can just have these instant.
Exactly. Or it's a resource that we can, like the Matrix. Like when he needs like karate or something, or kung fu, he just like taps into the kung fu model.
Yes, I mean, these are very wide and broad and deep topics. I think that eventually you'll get into like what does it mean to live or to think or to be. And so, but I guess we have a lot of practical problems meanwhile to solve for
That's true. I mean, imagine how the injustice is so much wider. Like some people don't have like basic vaccines, and then some people are getting like neurotransmitters in their brains.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, people will go through great lengths to solve their own problem. I think somewhere in one of the news articles recently, last week, or the week before, there was this price tag, like I think Medicare and a bunch of other entities, they actually had to put a price tag on a life.
All insurance companies, yeah.
Yeah, and it came out to like some millions of dollars, right? Maybe $10 million or something like that. And they were counting how much money was spent and how many lives were saved and those kinds of things, right? But it's about 10 million in the US, and which is a little bit of a surprise because most of us wouldn't think of that the average person in the US is worth $10 million, right?
And then the average person in, I don't know, Senegal, they will value them really low.
Yeah, yeah, much so, at least financially speaking, right? So I guess so. Besides work, what else is interesting, or how are you like channeling this empathy, right? By the way, I love the word empathy, and I love empathy. The whole idea behind conversations, this podcast, is driven through empathy and curiosity, right? Those two things, they've played a huge role in my journey, personally and professionally, and that's one of the reasons actually consulting our high tech advisors team is actually a great vehicle for me to achieve kind of what I'm driven by, which is empathy and curiosity. Because so we get to work with multiple domains, multiple clients simultaneously. So that gives us breadth and the ability to leverage empathy or from one domain or one experience for the benefit of the next, right? And also it serves curiosity, right? Because you're our team at least, and then sometimes I'm involved in so many different things simultaneously, right? And I'm a little bit like you. I wish there was that chip. I'm not so sure if I want that because I enjoy the act of learning, right? So it's kind of like food, eating food. We all enjoy eating food and we all need food, but I don't want it to be a 30-second experience.
I would say that there's a balance between the act of learning and the act of building or solving, right? You do need that learned database to be able to go ahead and solve or build.
Yeah, there's the harvesting, right? Once you put in all that effort, like how do I harvest? So of course you want to harvest it, especially to save all the people in Senegal and also on the subways of New York City and so on, right? So coming back, so in terms of you're obviously focused on your line of work is squarely overlapping with how you think or how what drives you personally, right? Or as a person. Are there any additional things you're doing, whether it's causes or, nonprofits or maybe
Well,
that
I mean, given that my
serve
main
that?
job was working for a nonprofit,
Yeah, maybe you get that enough at work.
yes, not so much. Frankly, I think at the Gates Foundation we work pretty long hours. We travel a lot. We're gone a lot from our homes. So you had asked about balance as well. Sometimes that is hard to strike. Actually, one of the reasons that I decided to discontinue like working there, even though it was so fulfilling and so impactful, I discontinued full time, is because there was a point when my dad was unwell and my grandmother was unwell, and my family and my mom would have really needed my help. We had two dogs. One of my puppies died
Oh, wow.
literally a day after I came back from one of my work trips. I couldn't be available for any of it. So I think balance can be a struggle, can be hard to strike. Part of that was my own doing. I wanted to get a lot done. So it's not like all of it was just forced on me. But I think when you're working on stuff that you feel could have such an impact, it's also very hard to say, no, we'll do it next month or next year. Like you feel like you must do it now because it's going to be so valuable to some people in the world, right? So the balance piece was hard, and that's one of the reasons I decided to switch to sort of part-time consulting. But what I like doing outside of work is I love being in nature. I love camping. My husband and I, we go a fair bit, and we've got two dogs who are fairly wild, so they love it as well. And I love building. So it may not be a work build, it might be, I
Sure.
don't know, like some random construction project in my backyard, but it gives me joy to do that. And so part of what I'm going to be doing with Enginiosity is I've started exploring. I think I want to work on wearable biosensor type project.
Sure.
I'm super excited about like AI and large language models, but I think it is very quickly removing any sort of competitive advantage that a software only startup could have,
Of
because
course.
it's just, you don't need as large a team, so you don't need as much funding. And anyway, I love building hardware, so I think I'm trying to figure out what type of wearable biosensor I'm going to build next.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say I love what I do, so it doesn't feel so much like work. Okay, I
Um,
love the building part less the meetings part. So not I don't love all that I do, but I think that's true for every type of job.
I think it's kind of like sales calls, right? People hate sales calls, but when it's successful, people actually love them. Meetings are the same way, right? It's like the wrong kind I don't like, but the right kind, you love and you need, of course.
Yeah, and you get
Uh,
energized from the right type of meetings. I mean,
exactly.
not every,
Exactly.
but there's like the budgeting stuff and the
Yeah,
projection
yeah, yeah.
stuff that I
Those
don't
life.
think you ever come
Those
back
life.
energized.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like we don't just get the parts we like, right? It's tax time. I spent that some chunk of that on my weekend on that, and I know some people love it. I don't like that, and so, but that's part of life. Okay, so one of the things I had in mind, and I think you might have mentioned it a little bit, which is setbacks, challenges, failures, etc., and learnings from that, techniques to deal with those, and the necessity of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I'm probably this is not dissimilar to everyone else. Maybe we start with defining what setbacks and successes mean to, I think, most people, but definitely to me. I think it's just the mismatch of the expectation you had and the outcome, right? If the outcome's much lower than what you expected, it's a setback. If it's much better than what you expected, it's a resounding success. So in that way, I feel like a little bit of his that depends on your own expectations of yourself. Setbacks in terms of, you grew up in India. If you're an engineer, you're all preparing to get into IIT. It's intensely competitive, and
And random.
I mean, I wouldn't. I think it's a rejection exam more than a selection exam, because
Yeah,
if you have like one incorrect problem, that's like 10,000 people, you're 10,000 ranks lower, something like that. I'm sure it's much worse now. So I think that was a big setback, right? And I think, I mean, I think for any listeners that don't know, IT is much harder to get into than than MIT or Stanford or whatever. I think through some objective measures of actually solving physics, chemistry, and math problems. And I think that also determines, not being from IIT determines what grad schools will accept you. They don't know other colleges. IITians get accepted into the top schools, non-IITians don't. So I think that was like a educational institutions. I think both of them, I felt they were setbacks. But I think from those two experiences, you learned a lot, right? I think I have to say both my educational experiences were very good in terms of actual education, projects, faculty, and everything. So I think I got a really good education. I got to rely on my capabilities rather than the brand of the school. I think that's that's pretty valuable in terms of learning. But I think one effect it did have is how the rest of the world treats you, right? When I got hired into my first role, this was at Intel. I was in lithography. Computational lithography is one of the only teams in America that does it, right? Because it's one of the only fabs in America. Everything's very secretive. It's a hard team to get into. Everybody was a PhD from MIT, Stanford, Berkeley. And I was sort of their experiment, first master's student hired into the team. I was definitely treated like I'm not at par with the others. And I think that had the effect of me also not giving my best, right? Because I was not going to get the best projects. And I think over time, I must have lowered expectations of myself because when I switched to a different team that I got to work on biosensors, Intel ended up starting a wearables division because we were trying to do lower powered processors back then. I think I didn't have really high expectations of myself. And then the project I was building on my desk ended up sort of, it has to be right place, right time, but you have to be working really hard to be successful even in right place, right time. And I was working really hard on these headphones that would measure heart rate with using almost no power, using very little power. And that ended up becoming Intel's first wearable product. And there was a new CEO. He wanted to launch a new division. There was a new VP. He wanted to launch a new division, and nobody was building a wearable device. I had one on my desk, and that's kind of how it happened. I got to go to the CES opening keynote with the CEO of Intel, ended up getting a couple of out of cycle promotions, which I was surprised by. So it was quite success. It was quite a lot of success, but it also happened because after my first few years of grad school and working, I had lowered the expectations I had of myself. But I think at that point, I realized that I had confidence in my own ability to build and to not feel like some stuff is too hard for me to figure out. I think it led to the belief that if, I don't know, not every other human being, but if some other human beings are able to figure out something, so will I be able to, right? Like that idea of like, I can't do that. That's too hard for me. I think that got eliminated. If that makes sense, right? So you need a series of setbacks and then successes for that to happen. If you just had success after success, you may question the role of luck and how much was it your own capability. So I'm glad it happened early in my career, and that, like I said, there's a lot of elements necessary. A big one is you have to have a manager, mentor who really believes in you. At some point, they have to believe in you more than you believe in yourself, and they have to extract the brilliance out of you. And I had that. So call out Lakshman. He's probably my favorite person outside of family.
That's very nice and lucky, right? Because it's not a given that we would run into these people. The good thing is the odds are high once you, as they say, right? Hard work helps you create your own luck a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, they say this, it's like a surface area concept, right? If you work really hard, you increase the surface area for luck to strike.
Exactly, exactly. As I was listening to you, I think one of the things I thought about, I think the two concepts that you mentioned, right? This, I don't know what the right word is, but my infatuation or everybody's infatuation with an IIT or Stanford or whatever it is, right? It's kind of contradictory to universal empathy, right? Because one is based on exclusivity, the other one is based on inclusivity, right? So if I say that every human's life is worth exactly the same, what institutions they go to or don't go to doesn't matter, right? How you get treated by a certain set of people will be very different, of course. And that's true if I have $10,000 in my pocket versus $1 in my pocket. People will treat me differently. If I've been to a different institution for my school, my work, people will treat me differently, right? But I think if we genuinely believe that every human being is worth the same, right? There's no better, no worse, and institutions don't matter. Our earning power, they'll affect our celebrity, they will affect the opportunities we get, definitely, right? And so, by the way, we have a college kid graduating, so I've been thinking about this a little bit more. And so she's 2 months away. She's going to be your neighbor.
Oh, where is she graduating from?
She's at Harvard, so she's finishing in May. Her name is Isha. She's actually been helping with our work a little bit. She's into a bunch of different things, but climate technology and ocean preservation and ocean
So she's going
stewardship.
to be based here?
She took a job in downtown San Francisco, I think a block or two from the Salesforce building. Actually, she's there now. I think she went to Truckee to ski today.
Okay, well, next time you are in the region, let me know.
Yeah, we will. But so coming back to this whole thing of how do we give ourselves the permission to be whoever we are and not get tied up, not tie up our identity to institutions or neighborhoods, right? Sometimes it's in neighborhoods. Where's your house? Right? And it's like, oh, I'm in XYZ. Oh, but that's a better neighborhood or worse neighborhood than my neighborhood, right? Or what's our car? Those kinds of things. And
Oh yeah, I
so,
talked to my husband about this. I'm like, I categorically do not want to get like, I don't know, lucid or something, right? Like, I don't want a car that is, its main job is to be a signal.
yeah, of course, right? And so I think sometimes we're a little bit too harsh on ourselves. And then there's the cultural things, right? And so again, this could be another show or a recap show.
The cultural thing, let's not touch it. It's too long.
Yeah, but the Indians and a whole bunch of other cultures outside of America, we have a relationship with like academics and that is almost hard to even explain. You can intellectually say it to people that come from different backgrounds, but they won't feel it.
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? The price of failure is so high in India.
Of course, it's extremely competitive. There's only one path. Because it's so competitive, you only get one time at bat, and that's your 12th standard or whatever it is.
And it's like the one day you're doing this exam that determines your whole like life.
The whole thing, right?
Yeah. But I think there's an added pressure. I don't know if like your other guests have talked about this on the women. If you are a woman who wants to sort of make sort of primary decision making about your own life and destiny, then you need to have some sort of career. But if you don't have a good enough career pretty quickly, you shall be pressured into a marriage. I feel like the added drive that Indian women display comes from that. Like, I need to avoid this happening early to me against my wishes at all costs. I heard this interview of Smriti Irani. She's the Minister of Women and Child Development. So she's also somebody that, like, her ministry is also something that we work with at the Gates Foundation or would like to. So she's very accomplished, right? She was a pretty great actress, TV actress in India, and then she had a few different ministries. She's a primary politician in India, doing good work. But like I saw one of her old interviews where she was working so hard, so desperately, going to all auditions because she really needed a job because the deal she had with her dad was there was a certain date that if she did not have a contract by that date, she would have to get engaged to some guy.
Culture influences heavily, I suppose, sometimes maybe for worse, but also thankfully sometimes for the better.
Well, every coin has two sides, right? I'm sure each coin has worse and better sides.
Absolutely. Our family, my family comes from a bunch of farmers in Gujarat or in the west side of India. When it came to what to do, especially for the sons, three sons, two daughters, it was like you're gonna do anything but farming, right? So you had to go and figure it out. The only way out was schools for the most part, right? So, and that's probably it's not too uncommon a story at a high level for many families. This is probably most of what I had in mind as far as what to cover in our conversation. There's a couple of things that I had that we have yet to cover. One is if you have any questions for me. This came about from earlier conversations where the guests were like, let's make it fair.
The questions I had, one I think you already answered, which was what motivates you, what makes you tick. And you had mentioned empathy and curiosity.
Huge themes and huge elements. For empathy, actually, and for both of them, One of the things I discovered over the years was being a journalist would have been fun. And I like writing. So like if I could live in maybe the 20th century, earlier parts to towards the end, I'd be like a print journalist. And I love cities and I would interview everyone in all domains. I would want to interview the homeless people, the most powerful, the mayors, the business tycoons, the celebrities, the artists. And also there's this physical curiosity. So like I've lived in Seattle for a long time and my GPS in the car is never on. So you can give me an address and I'll probably take you there without looking at anything.
I would get lost getting from like home to school. Like I would have like been lost in the world without GPS. So that is pretty amazing.
Whether it's a feature or a bug, you can decide. But because it's like I'm able to do that, but I have a need to be able to do that, right? And it's not a challenge. I don't give myself and say, okay, I'm going to try to do it without GPS. But I love exploring the city, love knowing the streets. And at one point, many, many years ago, I was a messenger or courier, but with cars, right? So we literally got to see the whole city. But that was some years ago, and then the city has changed since a little bit. But so those are very, very huge themes, just exploring, because that's how you satisfy your curiosity, right? You have to explore a lot. And so at home, it's just too many documentaries than YouTube, right? It's just like, so my wife's like, can we watch something real?
Real as in non-documentary, like non-real.
Like what normal people would call real, right? Like entertainment.
But that is fictional, whereas documentaries are real.
No, no, I know. But what I mean is like real as in real
Like
entertainment.
normal.
Yeah, yeah, normal entertainment, right? And then there are all these random books, right? So that show up. And I've had many conversations, especially with people in the education domain, like professors and stuff, and teachers and managers, about like how do you get people, like what you're saying, you found this mentor or manager or a mentor in a manager who figured out that Indira can do a lot more than what she believes herself. He got you to Lakshman. So Lakshman got you to basically perform at a level or achieve at a level that was significantly beyond what you had before about yourself, right? And so then how do you do that for all people? If you go back to your empathy, it's like you're like you want to do that for everybody in Senegal. You want to do that for everybody in Oakland, right? In tents and outside of tents and everything. So how do you scale that? And I think if you can get people curious about something, then they will go do things, right? At least that's what's worked for me. So if I'm curious so like I remember in college taking classes because I heard a topic and it took me years to take the classes to be able to understand that topic. But I heard it. One example I remember distinctly, and it's very geeky, was a Fourier transforms. So I wasn't the most advanced math student, but I was kind of like decent, right? So you have to study, I think, math for like 2 or 3 years before you can understand a Fourier transform. Once you get to college, if you're the average science prepared kid in the US,
Yeah, in the US maybe. But Indian high school calculus is probably good enough.
you won't get to Fourier transforms in calculus,
No,
right?
no, but I'm saying if you've done high school calculus in India, then you have enough math to understand Fourier transform.
You could, but if you actually just keep taking classes till you get to Fourier transforms, it'll be 3 years, and that's what happened to me. And I wasn't even a math major, right? So anyway, our daughter, we had conversations around, okay, all the kids when she was in high school, they were like in robotics and coding clubs and stuff, right? I was trying to understand if she was interested in some of that or not, and she wasn't. But what ended up happening one time, I see these like Android books or Java books or something show up, and I'm like, what is this? Like, what has gotten you to do this, right? And it turned out she's like, I'm passionate about really our climate change and getting people to be more responsible. And we figured out that we need to build some apps to actually drive home the message or to do something. So then she started learning that, right? But not because she was interested in apps at all. And so coming back to how do you use curiosity as a tool to get people to deliver at a level beyond or in domains different from what they thought they could succeed in or they were interested in. So maybe you make it a dependency.
Actually, you are getting to sort of the heart of some of what I was asking the question, right? Motivation to do something can be two types, right? It's either goal driven, which is your daughter wanting to have this climate change impact. And so that is motivating her to do the work of learning app building. The second is motivation that is actually you're getting joy from the activity, which is a lot of it is curiosity driven, where you love to code or you love to build or you love to learn. And so that's you're getting joy from the activity itself, and that's what's motivating you to engage in it, versus you're going to get satisfaction from hitting the goal, and that imagining the anticipation of that goal hitting is what's motivating you. So that's what I was getting at. Are you goal driven or are you getting joy from the activity? Are you driven by that?
And they're also not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, but there's definitely some tasks I would say, like there's tasks that I do not get joy from doing, like say taxes.
Yeah, of course.
But I am driven by the goal, which is I want to have it submitted and get my refund.
Yeah, and you need to be compliant, right? You don't want to end up in the crosshairs of the IRS and so on. Life and maturity, right? What so-called what comes
Well,
from
you can design your career to have more or less of one, right? Like if you're very goal driven.
just kind of talk about our work a little bit because it overlaps with what we've been talking about. So one way we describe our team is that we're experts at engaging experts on behalf of the clients, right? So that serves curiosity really well, right? Because then we get to work with a bunch of experts. And another way we say our business is that we're a market maker in expertise. So if I meet you and you're in the domain or XYZ domain of tech or healthcare, gaming, domains that we work in, then we're like, Indira, we're a market maker in expertise. Do you want to buy expertise or sell expertise? We'll take the other end of the transaction, right? And so on the little bit of the motivational and philosophical side, we say that we like to map meaningful problems to people who find them meaningful to solve, right? And so that's where this alignment of who you naturally are with your work or with your career objectives or career path is really critical, right? And it's not static, right? It's not like I'm in this path and I stay on this path for 40 years and then everything hunky dory, right? My interests will change because I will develop some diseases as you guaranteed me.
No, not me. We're all developing them as we speak.
I mean, also, we'll have dogs and we'll have kids and we'll have parents that are aging. And so our phases of life and kind of the focus and priorities will shift over time. And so we'll find different things meaningful to do work-wise over time. And so, but I think it's really critical. We spend a lot of time. First time I heard about this was from Jim Collins, right, who wrote a bunch of books, and Good to Great is probably one of his more famous ones. But there was one just before that called Built to Last. And in that, he had a quote that said that everybody's in search for a meaningful life, and you can't have meaningful life without meaningful work. And so everybody's in search for meaningful work.
Oh yeah, you can't be on the hedonistic treadmill and just feel satisfied. Yes.
Yeah, and so I mean we're the spoiled ones in some ways, right? Because there are so many of us in the world that all they're like, I just need some bread in the evening, so I need to go do whatever it takes to get that. And but when you're lucky enough to select or have a choice around what do you do, then you owe it to yourself and you owe it to people around you to actually do that mapping better.
So I have a follow-up question. I guess it depends on how lucky enough you are, right? Because it's a Maslow's hierarchy. You need your food and you need your shelter, etc. So say if you had more money than you can spend in many lifetimes, like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Elon Musk, although he doesn't calm down.
I might need more than any of those, but keep going.
Why would you need? You won't be able to spend it. Why would you need it? But anyway, so now you do not need bread in any form whatsoever. What would a great day for you look like? You're not at all worried about bread. And tell me about the day.
Yeah, absolutely. A very interesting question, kind of very timely. I was talking to a friend a few weeks ago. He had just come back from this awesome vacation. He and his wife are in their 50s, and they were joined by one of the guy's college roommate or something, so from 40 some odd years ago, right? Whenever they would have been in college, who that friend's friend has been very successful financially. So they all four vacationed in Croatia. And they were telling me about that vacation. They took this private deep sea fishing yacht out, and then they caught like fresh tuna and stuff, right? And you had this freshest sushi possible, right? Right on the boat, right? Like there was like a chef who cut it all up and stuff like that, or something like that. So, and that would be one of the best days for most of us, right? And as we were having this conversation, there's a trail near my office, and it used to be a light rail line that's about maybe end to end 15, 20 miles. And the city and the county are taking strips, they're stripping off the tracks and putting gravel so you can actually have pedestrian, bicyclists, and dogs and everything. Much of it is done, but there's about a 6 mile section within 3 blocks of our office that we can access. So we're on that trail. This friend and I, we were having this conversation. And then we walked probably for 2 hours. It was like 6 miles. And then we ended up at a restaurant and we ate something very modest compared to his yacht trip, like spaghetti and garlic bread or something, right? So then we had this question: what's the best day? What's a perfect day? So I was telling the friend, this is my perfect day, or it is one of the best days I could have, because it goes back to something you were saying. So you sounds like you like to spend time in nature. I like to be outside. One of the things about being outdoors, it's a very, very fast equalizer of wealth. When two people, one super rich and one super poor, are outside, the difference between the two is much smaller than when they are in their dwellings. And humans were meant, except for when we were resting, to be outside, right? And there's a bunch of science and everything that says that your stress level's lower. Everything's better when you're outside, right? And if the weather sucks, just get some better layers, right? If it's cold. And so outdoor time, walks. I do a lot of walking meetings. We have these questions like, what would you rather be doing? What do you see? And I'm in my 50s, right? So a lot of the people are talking about retiring and stuff. It's like, oh, what are you going to do when you retire and stuff? And I'm like, I'm doing what I want to be doing. There's nothing, I mean, of course, it's going to change, right? And so swimming, I like, skiing, I like. So those things would be part of a best day. But like in skiing, there's super luxury places you can go to, and then there are very modest or at least modestly equipped places you could go to. And maybe when I was younger, I don't know what the right word is, but I was more impressed by, like, if I go to into a restaurant, the quality of the food and stuff, but also it's like if I felt like, oh, I went to a restaurant that was so good, it charged me so much money. And then there was an element of joy there, right? But it's much less so now, right? And so and again, going back to the empathy and curiosity, if I get to explore a new place on foot, I think that experience is probably unbeatable.
So you have a lot of exploring outdoors that you would spend your time doing.
Yeah, exactly. And then combine that with conversations, right? Getting to know people, getting to know new information, new domains. And then on these walks, I've learned so many things, right? Like one time, a friend and a client, we take walks regularly. Actually, he's supposed to come by tomorrow, and he's from Russia. So I was learning about like Russian languages while we were walking on this trail in good weather. And then how some of them, well, not some, but the Eastern European languages, some of them have like Latin script and some of them the scripts and how that came into being, right? This is a very long answer, but these are the things I appreciate or enjoy more than what probably would be bought with, right? And of course, I do. I'm a foodie. I appreciate luxuries. Definitely. I don't enjoy coach flying, for example.
Oh, I agree. I think the one thing that I do spend more money on is eliminating wait times
Yes.
and sort of crowded places. So, like the ski example, I would pay for the, I don't know, it doesn't have to be luxurious, but they just have to be less people. So I have
Yes,
to
yes,
wait
yes,
less.
of course. The good thing is that not every day is crowded, no matter where you go almost, right? And of course there are private clubs where there's nobody there anytime. Probably in some ways our interests are similar, or kind of what we get joy out of is similar, right? And I think the earlier question about goals driven versus joy driven, maybe. I fundamentally think there are three elements or three core requirements in human, probably for all the organisms, for humans to be successful, right? So those three are struggle. As much as we hate it, sometimes when we're struggling, if you take the element of struggle away from humans, you basically will have, it's kind of like taking away gravity from astronauts that are in space, and the muscles start atrophy and the bones start getting thinner.
That's actually such a great analogy, right?
Yeah, you
The
can't take
struggle
the
is what
load
makes
away.
you strong and you're proud of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. You need load. You need load. It's like you hate it because it's heavy. right?
That's a really good analogy. I'm going to use it.
The second thing we need is play.
You could argue putting on weight is good for you because you're increasing your load. Okay, I'm just bad joke. We'll leave it.
We'll come back to that once we stop recording. So, but play is important, especially for, again, for humans. Again, if you take away play, it's going to have similar consequences. Maybe it might take a little bit longer to take away struggle. And then these are not necessarily, again, mutually disjoint or exclusive, right? Play and struggle can go together. So
There's
that's
also like a cultural aspect of how much play is considered acceptable in a specific culture, right? Like, for example, if you're, I remember traveling in Singapore with my sister. She was there for college and worked there for a few years. And I was just like laughing at jokes really loudly in a metro train.
Yep.
And she's like, everyone's staring at you. Stop laughing. And I realized that they don't have permission to be so openly joyful in a public place. So it's also very cultural. Even India, I think, if you're like a serious head of a household man, you better all be serious your whole life if you got like this full joint family asking you for directions.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, these are surface layers, right? You could still play in different ways, right? You may not be able to. I mean, one thing that I was really surprised by when I came here as a kid, I came to Seattle when I was 13 from Gujarat. The thing that was really weird for a while was grown-ups eating candy. In India, I never saw grown-ups having candy. They could have fruit and stuff. They would have fruit, right? And they could enjoy the best feasts and all the sweets from Bengal and elsewhere.
But they don't have chocolate. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a different, they had Indian candy, I guess.
Yeah, but anyway, it was this expectation that grown-ups, at least back where I was, were not supposed to play or have that treat, right? So, and then the third one is this is my version of Maslow's hierarchy. Was a smarter person. So there's a lot more granularity, but I just have these three. So the third one is love. So you need struggle, play, and love. And if you take any of these core elements away, you're going to run into problems. When it comes to love, of course, many different kinds. I used to be part of a men's group, which is no longer running right now, but it was created by these five gentlemen in some of the wealthier parts of Seattle. And they were all successful. There was like a former football player, former CFO of Microsoft, former CEO of World Vision. So they're very highly accomplished individuals, and they created this men's group. And one of them, he runs a hedge fund, and he was supposed to be in World Trade Center the day of 9/11. But he got lucky because his routine changed because he had to go make an extra stop and he didn't have to go through that traumatic event like his colleagues ended up going through. And this group, these five individuals were actually evangelicals. And they created this group to really try to bring people of all faiths together, or men. But Michael had this saying, which always I liked and it stuck with me, which was, all humans are made to love and meant to be loved. And so, and then he kind of said it in the context of spirituality. And then the other thing he mentioned was that labels are a challenge. Every time you have a label, you got in and out now. Either you are under that label or you're not, right? If you're a scientist, it means if I'm a scientist, you're not, right? Or whatever. So now when it comes to spirituality or religion, if there's a label, you got a problem, right? Those three things are kind of somewhat in a hierarchy, but they're all super critical and you can't do without any of them.
Yeah, and I think, to your point about love, which I don't think we talk very much about in professional settings, but I do think we have a growing crisis of just loneliness, right? Which is not just people not becoming couples, but I think modern conveniences have made dealing with other human beings inconvenient. And so there's just so many people that are staying by themselves. Anyway, in the more developed countries, in the richer countries, people don't live in communities anymore. They stopped living with their parents a long time ago, and then they won't even couple up and they'll just be by themselves. And that is a whole crisis in itself. And loneliness is supposed to, I think the mortality rate associated with loneliness is similar to many diseases. I also think it's like the biggest sort of the underlying drive to have children is like you make these people to love you and to love yourself.
There's a lot of probably motivations or things that motivate people to procreate. But I think part of it is what you alluded to, right? You want to learn all these things, and you're like, you're not going to be able to do it. Maybe then you create the next gen who can do a slightly better job or learn more things than you did. At least so I've felt that sometimes. But yeah, I think this is it's a pretty big challenge. I don't know if you remember when we were having our healthcare and AI event in December, I had a question, which was we were talking about how AI is going to affect healthcare. As we were kind of going through that conversation, this question came to me like, and we were talking heavily from the healthcare providers and payers, kind of the production side of the house. But when you talked about healthcare consumption, then will AI make me happier and healthier?
I mean, I think definitely to start with, because so many companies are now working on these AI companions, right? Whether they're romantic companions or just friends or just
No, we have all that, right? If you go back decades, right, people were like, oh, let's bring in this technology. It's going to increase productivity. It's going to increase well-being. But then eventually, if you look at how happy we are, we're not happier than we were probably 60 years ago.
But we are more comfortable and convenient. I would like we are warmer when we want to be. We are dying later.
Are we healthier? I don't know, right? Of course, there are more of us around. More of us are better fed than we've ever been,
Yeah, so we are healthier. We are less undernourished. We
right? But in the US, except for, I don't know that percent, 10, 20%, nobody's food insecure, right? And a lot of people that are food insecure is not because they are food insecure. There are other issues, right? They can't get to the food sources or their mental issues or addiction issues and so on. So that's a question. And money doesn't buy happiness. I guess maybe that should be my parting thought.
all right.
So most wonderful. So thank you,
Same.
Indira.
Thank you, Haresh.
Bye.